Good afternoon and welcome, viewers. I am here today with my colleague, Dr. Wynand Louw. Myself, I am Dr. Jesse Pillay from the National Metrology Institute of South Africa. My position at the National Metrology Institute of South Africa is currently in the capacity of Acting Directorship at the Chemical Materials and Medical Metrology Unit. My colleague, Dr. Louw, has got much larger, or should I say extended, biography in terms of his positionings. So the first of which is presidency of the CIPM, thereafter, let me say, the Secretariat of AfriMets, as well as the Director of International Partnerships and Innovations at the National Metrology Institute of South Africa. Welcome, Dr. Louw, and today we will be focusing, I know there's quite a range of portfolios or positions that you currently hold, but specifically for this interview we will be concentrating on your position as the president of the CIPM, because this month marks your 2-year anniversary. And for those of you that do not know, Dr. Louw is actually the first president voted in from the African continent. So, Dr. Louw, welcome. Would you like to say a few words to our viewers in terms of your positioning at the CIPM, and maybe talk us through actually what is the CIPM and where do they stand, and what's their role in terms of what it is that the function and as well as your role there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pillay, and I'll probably call you Jesse from here on in the interview.
Good.
And it's interesting times, of course, to have the interview. We will keep our social distancing and we can put our masks away.
Thank you.
So, but yes, very interesting times. And thank you for inviting me to talk about the CIPM. As you say, it was 2 years ago that I was elected by the 18 members of the CIPM as the president. And yes, it's the first time in 140 years that there is a president from Africa. So it's quite an honor, but also a big obligation for me. But perhaps let me just quickly explain to our viewers what the CIPM is, because not everyone will be from the metrology world. So it of course started in 1875 when 17 nations came together and decided that they want to develop the metric system as a global measurement system. And at that time, the 17 nations then introduced the meter, and that was based on the circumference of the Earth, so 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator. And from that, they also reduced the kilogram. Mm-hmm. And basically, we had those 2 units then as the first units of the metric system. And then the second, and of course the second was defined in terms of the rotation of the Earth. So that was the system that they introduced at that time. At that meeting where they signed the meter convention in 1875 in Paris, they also established a permanent institute, the BIPM, in Paris. So the French government basically agreed to host the institute, the International Institute, the BIPM. Mm-hmm. And so we often go to the BIPM. But in that same convention, they then established a committee to look after the scientific part of maintaining these units that they have established. And at that time, they had a representative from each of the 17 countries. And basically today, and the president, so it made 18.
Yes.
So there are 18 members today of the International Committee for Weights and Measures. So as of now, there are 63 member states, so 63 countries. The biggest countries in the world, the industrial countries, have all signed the convention. Mm-hmm. And then we've got 40 associates of the General Conference, so just like an entry into the system. Sure. And there are now 40 countries that have done that. So what can I say more about the system? Later years, other units were added, And finally, I think in 1974, they added the 7th base unit, the mole for amount of substance. And so we are now maintaining those 7 base units and all the other units that we derive from that. So the CIPM has got 2 main tasks. The first one is to look after this international measurement system and the base units. So we established consultative committees, CCs, for each of the units. So you will have like a CCM for mass, a CCL for length, a CCQM for amount of substance, and so on. And there is a member of the CIPM that is then elected as president of the consultative committee. For a while, I was, for example, the president of the consultative committee for ionizing radiation, I think from about 2014 to 2019. And then I was, of course, elected president, and so we elected another president for ionizing radiation. The other
sorry,
yeah, please.
And I'm curious, and before being in that position of president of that committee, were you then just a member in the committee itself? So I'm curious to know about how you made your way up to becoming that president, and then from there getting elected into the presidency of CIPM.
Yeah, good question, and let me explain very quickly. We've got a system in the organization where every 4 years basically there is an election of the CIPM, and then a call is sent out to all the members, the 63 states, and they can nominate individuals to be on the committee. And you must then have the support of your country, of course, but you are then nominated as an individual to the committee. And basically you send your CV and what you can commit to and what you can contribute to the committee. For example, at that time, I put in my CV that I had a background in ionizing radiation and in amount of substance, chemistry. And then I was elected to the committee in 2013. And in 2014, they then asked me to stand for the presidency of the ionizing radiation when the president then retired, basically. And so I was elected by the CIPM as the president of ionizing radiation. So I'm a member of the committee since 2013.
Good. So I'm now curious, when first elected as the president of the CIPM, and I'm trying to, because this must have been quite, I mean, not must have been, it is, it's a very big honor. What were your first thoughts? And if I can add to that, not just your first thoughts, but how did you foresee at that point, merging your thoughts together with the strategy, or should I say the vision of the CIPM? So if you can just talk us through that, maybe, in terms of what is your outlook and how did that connect to the current vision at the time of the CIPM?
Yeah, it was a very interesting process that day that I was elected. Before me, it was mostly representatives from the biggest or the industrial nations. My predecessor was actually the first one from outside that group of countries, and he was from Australia, Dr. Inglis. So you could already see that things were changing a bit away from it being dominated by just certain countries, the whole system. But yes, I'm then basically the first president from the developing countries.
Yes.
And I think that was the thoughts that went through my mind that day where I was elected, and I thought, now I can really bring the needs and the problems of the developing countries to the system. Of course, one was already doing that as a member of the committee.
Sure.
But I thought that day that this is now a very good time then to really bring that into the system. And it was already going through my mind, how can I do things like that? How can I modernize the system? I must also very quickly explain that in 2018, we took the revised SI to the General Conference. The General Conference are all the member states that come together every 4 years. And we took the revised SI, International System of Units, to the conference. And that was the big issue for more than close to 20 years that we all worked on the revision of the SI. to have a new definition for a kilogram, for example, that is independent of the artifact prototype of the kilogram kept in Paris. So we wanted a new definition that you can realize the kilogram anywhere in the world. And also then for 3 other units that actually were linked to the kilogram, like the ampere and so on. So I'm not going to go through all that process at the moment, but that was the big thing. And we worked on that for 20 years, and especially the last 10 years before 2018. So you had this big build up to the 2018 conference, and the conference adopted the revised SI. Big news. It was international news.
Absolutely.
And at that conference, we elected the new CIPM. There were about 6 or 7 of the old members that were re-elected, but really 11 new members. And then we met 2 months after that, and I was elected as president. So you sit at that meeting and you realize the big thing the past 20 years was this revision of the SI. Sure. So what is the big thing now? And that day it also went through my mind that this can now fall a bit flat, because you really worked so hard towards the revision of the SI. And this was now done. So what now? But already at that conference, questions were asked by some countries about, is our organization modern? Are the names that we use for the organization still the best names to be used? Like the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, should it not be called the International Organization of something? And I realized that day that there are new things on the horizon, and that's really to modernize the organization. And I think with my background in Africa and working with, and basically one of the founder members of AfriMets, the Inter-Africa or Intra-Africa metrology system, I thought that I have everything that it takes to lead us into this, the modernization of the organization. And very soon after that, at the first meeting after that, I said to the members that let's develop a strategy 2030 plus for the CIPM. So let's really look forward and decide as the new CIPM, how should everything look? How should we operate within a new modern organization? And what should we do to modernize the organization further? And that day, we basically decided on 5 main themes for our strategy. And the first one was really the evolving needs in metrology. So what are the new things on the horizon? What is going to change our lives? What are the disruptive technologies that is coming into the system? The second one was scientific excellence, or the scientific challenges. And that had to do with the revised SI, because you now revised the SI. You had the new definition for the kilogram, but there was still a lot of work to be done how to realize the kilogram with a kilowatt balance or with the X-ray crystal density project. But there was still a lot of scientific work to be done, and it was quite daunting for the National Metrology Institutes, especially in the developing world. So we realized that we will have to really look at that, and we already started to talk about the next redefinition. And for the second, for example, we want to redefine the second in the future in terms of optical frequencies. So that process also had to start, and we realized we need really to focus on that. The third leg of our strategy was really how to work with international organizations, other international organizations, because you can become inwardly focused and then you don't really work with all the other international organizations, like the International Organization for Legal Metrology, OIML, the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, ILAC, and so on. So we really realized that we want to deepen our relationships and cooperation with other international organizations. The fourth leg was really the membership of the organization. Yes, we're 140 years old. 103 countries officially belong to the system. But there are about more than 80 countries recognized by the UN as countries that do not belong officially to our system. And we sat there and said, it's now time to do something about that. We need to define a strategy of how to get these other 80, I think it's 82 countries involved in our system. And so there's a lot of discussion on that now, how to do that. The fifth leg was really then how to modernize the organization, and that has to do with governance. And that's the other big role of the CIPM.
Okay.
We're responsible for the governance of the international organization, the BIPM.
Yeah.
So we like the board of the BIPM. We need to make sure that all the governance issues are in place and provide guidance, approve the budgets and everything. And I was also of the opinion at that time that because we have spent 20 years on the revision of the SI, that some of that was a bit archaic and a bit outdated. And we needed to really focus now on making sure that our organization are modern in terms of where is international organizations going. And there's a big drive for that. So we started with a process to have rules of procedure for the CIPM. Everything was in bits and pieces there, but now we developed a one full rules of procedure for the committee. How do we conduct our meetings? For example, it also includes what do we now do during the lockdowns and the pandemic that we can't travel.
Yeah.
So we introduced into that rules of procedure how can we hold our meetings online and so on, and also how to now interact with the general conference because we can't just set up a meeting quickly.
You know, that was actually when you spoke about now modernizing and going forward, the first thought that jumped into my mind is looking at digital transformation, looking at, you know, we operate in a digital era. That's it. It's a digital economy at the moment. And I would like to look at or get your take in terms of a digital revolution, but while, you know, considering the impact on membership states, looking at the likes of connectivity as well as inclusivity, and how do we bring these things together as a merger, you know, and why I bring that about is because, like you then said when we started, you know, some of the problems that we would experience in Africa might be down to connectivity, and how does that then, you know, impact us in terms of keeping abreast or staying on track in terms of what's actually happening on the international level.
Yeah, when we...
Sorry, that was a fully loaded question.
Yes, you can remind me if I don't answer everything, but let me make a start.
I apologize, yes, continue.
When I was elected in 2019 and we defined this strategy that we're now going to develop,
Yeah.
Immediately within the evolving needs and the scientific challenges, we identified digitalization as one of the issues. In the first place, evolving needs. It was very clear that that is coming, and of course already busy, and we can't be left behind. You had to start to talk about digitizing the international system, the SI, having it available, having it machine readable, so for where the world was going. And then of course when you start to discuss the scientific challenges, then you start to discuss the challenges that you have in doing this in the metrology world, and what does it need to include. And we started with the evolving needs, and we were just starting to discuss the digitalization, or the DSI, that we will just use as a short way of talking about this. And then the pandemic came. So we were saying to ourselves, in future, we will have to make more and more use of online meetings.
Yes.
And I remember saying that about 4 months before the pandemic.
Yes.
And we were just starting to put things on paper. And the next moment, here was the pandemic. And we were just like, had to do it very quickly and had to jump into it. So in the first place, of course, I think the pandemic really accelerated what we were already talking about. And immediately we had to approve rules of engaging online, because the Meter Convention of 1875 could not do that, because in those days you had the telegram, and that was it.
Yes.
So you called the meeting by telegram, sent it out to everyone, and then waited for 3 weeks until everyone could come to the meeting.
Well, I suppose this talks very nicely into the recent DSI symposium.
Yes.
Maybe you'll touch on that as well.
All of that said, we then actually started a special task group of the CIPM, and that was actually done 3 months before the pandemic struck. So in October 2019. So we said, yes, our task group, under the leadership of our Vice President, Dr. Joachim Ulrich of Germany, and he had to drive this whole thing for the CIPM. And they also then started an expert group from the NMIs where they say we need experts in digitalization to come and assist us. So now we have this task group and an international expert group that we also from our institute, Home Institute, NMISA, also participate in. So we started that, and they then said they want a big conference. They actually wanted, of course, a face-to-face. They were planning a face-to-face conference in 2020, late in 2020. So finally, we had to then go the online route, and we had a big workshop, DSI workshop, in February this year, 2021. Yes. And basically, the total participation was over 1,000 people that actually dialed in. The day that we had our regional metrology organization meetings, because we also organized a day for each of the regional metrology organizations like Afrimet, Euramet, and Comet went together, and we had one on the Tuesday. And there were over 500 people basically signed in to participate online in the conference. So I think it was hugely successful, but what came out of that was really the need to work very closely with the other international organizations like the OIML for legal metrology, ILAC for accreditation, and CoData, the IAA, and all the others that we are working with.
And I think this then talks perfectly into the strategy you were just making reference to.
Exactly. From the RMO ones, it really came out that things that they are really interested in at the moment are things like a digital calibration certificate and a digital certificate of conformity. And with the problems now with travel and accessibility to institutes, we can't go to an institute and check their quality system if it's fit for purpose for our mutual recognition arrangement. So you're now starting to do that online. And things like this digitalization is part of that now and will really assist us to do these things remotely or online. And for example, in Afrimet, we've already now started to do these assessments of the quality systems of the institutes remotely. So we get all the documentation, we review it, we ask questions online, we have meetings online, and then we get videos to witness the calibration, the scientific part, the physical calibration, and you watch the video, and then you ask questions again online, and we do the whole process in this way. But in the same way, like for example, a digital certificate of conformity will then have this whole process of here's a measurement instrument, it is type approved, it's tested and type approved, and then calibrated. It will have all of that in a digital format. So if there's that number or the link on the instrument, you can look at the instrument, you can go to the link, and you will find all the information, the history of that, of the whole process.
Yes.
And that's really, I think, will be a big influence in our world in future.
Yeah, because you know, if I look at it now and from what you're saying, and I questioned early in terms of inclusivity and, you know, looking at how you bring member states in, I think from what you've just indicated, as well as making reference to the 500 participants that that were active on that first 3 days or so of the symposium, and you did also indicate that COVID accelerated this digital transformation. I think with all things considered, it's actually fallen very nicely into the strategy that you had actually put out in terms of going forward at the CIPM.
No, for sure. And something that I did not mention earlier, as part of that membership issue, or how do we actually broaden the participation in the convention, we did a study, the BIPM did a study for us, and of how many countries were not part. I mentioned 82.
Yeah.
It's only 3% of the GDP of the world. So those 82 countries are relatively small economies.
Yeah.
So they only contribute about 3% to GDP of the world. But they count up to over 1 million people. So 1,000,000 people. So that's a lot of people. It's basically 14 to 15% of the world population that is not officially part of the system.
Yeah.
And that is really, I think, what this whole strategy is going to do with the digitalization. And we can use the digitalization to also pull in these countries, get them to participate at least online in our activities. If we then have things like a digital SI that is machine readable, they can access that from their country without coming to France to participate in the system. So I think it will make the whole system, our plan is, we really hope that to digitalize everything will make our whole system a lot more accessible to the world and help with the coordination of the whole international system of measurement.
Okay, you mentioned the GDP, and I could go on for hours now talking about that, but we will bring this to a close. But maybe two more questions, and the one being when you referenced GDP now, and if you look at revenue generation, and in particular, national metrology institutes throughout the world, and you probably have a much better helicopter view in terms of revenue generation. And I know ourselves at the NMISA is strongly focusing on ensuring that we continue to push for revenue generation. How do you think that relates to what the rest of the world or the rest of the metrology institutes around the world are doing? Is it along the same trajectory?
Absolutely. Let me just say that with the pandemic, there's of course a lot of financial pressure on institutes. Their funding are being cut. So they need to find other ways of actually earning revenue. And the NMISA, if I can talk about our home institute quickly, is definitely not unique in this. If I look at many institutes in Europe, they are being forced to go this route at the moment. So I think you will see this trend in the whole world. But let me talk about what the quality infrastructure, and that of course now metrology we believe is the most important part or pillar of the quality infrastructure, but of course the standards, the ISOs and our national standard bodies, the accreditation, and South Africa, SANAS, internationally ILAC, and so legal metrology, and then there's the electrotechnical standards as well, and so on. So the IEC part of it's a ISO IEC. Then you have in the regions, you have the European Union. And we're now going for a Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA. And the issue is that you as a country cannot meaningfully participate even just in your regional body or free trade area if you don't have the QI in place. So it's extremely important. And yes, these 82 countries only contribute 3% to the GDP of the world, but the growth potential is immense. And if you can now get the QI in place in these 82 countries, the 3% contribution may very quickly double to 6% or more. And if you look at Africa, for example, where most of our members are developing countries, so we've got 46 members of AfriMets, and I think all 46 are basically defined as developing countries. So with a few leading like South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, and Nigeria, for example. But yes, I think if we now really go for this, and as part of this whole process, also make sure that we establish the QI in all these countries.
There's great opportunity.
For sure.
Absolutely. No, fantastic. Tell me, my last question then is, in terms of your vision for the next few years, you have spoken about it holistically, but if you can just zoom into, where you're going now from here in terms of the CIPM, maybe in the short term and then the medium term, if you can talk us through that.
Yeah, in the short term, it's really to now finalize the strategy. A lot of work has been done. We're getting to the point where I've got the 5 drafts from the 5 groups, and so we're now consolidating everything. And in June, we have a CIPM meeting. Perhaps in person in France, otherwise online, where we plan to approve this draft strategy and really just putting on paper what we as the CIPM, with a lot of input from RMOs, from the CCs, from the NMIs, are saying, if we look at the future, what are the main things that we are now addressing to make sure our organization is modern and can actually address the challenges of the future.
Sure.
So that is the first big thing. The second one is really this issue to really broaden the participation in the system. And we want to take a proposal to the General Conference in 2022. We will not be ready at that time to say this is exactly how it's working, but we want to go to them and say, give us a mandate to now finalize it, and we will tell them what our plans are. And that's the big thing. If we can get the approval of the members to do that, then the medium term is really to then do the hard work to figure out exactly how can we do it, that it makes sense, and to really broaden the participation and pull in the developing countries into the system. And I think by the time that I step down as president and a new president is elected, I can be re-elected in 2022. But yes, we will see what happens in 2022. So at least by that time, we will have these things in place. And hopefully at that meeting, we will have a mandate to really go and now implement the broadening part of the organization. Then I will already feel that I've done what I set out to do. If I'm re-elected, then of course it's the implementation, and that I will then really enjoy to do in the next 4 years after that. But so that's the short term, the medium term, and in the long term, just by doing this, making sure that our organization, basically the second or third oldest international organization in the world, and one with probably the biggest network of scientific institutions. There are something like 259 institutes that's participating in our system. That this organization is really okay to go into the future.
Oh, good. Well, you have heard it straight from Dr. Louw, who is the president of the CIPM, and we've heard of the strategy of the CIPM, and we now understand, going into the future, all things considered, the likes of measurement, taking, the digital route, looking at connectivity, looking at inclusivity, bringing in membership states. And we thank you for your time, Dr. Louw. It has been a pleasure, and we wish you well as we wish you everything of the best at the next election, and we are most certain that you will be re-elected. Thank you very much.
Thank you.